I never imagined the phone call I got during Christmas dinner in 2024 would be the difference between life and death. An unknown voice whispered, "Pretend you're sick and leave now. They're going to poison your food." I looked at my family in absolute terror. That night, I discovered that the people I loved most had planned my murder. My name is Robert Miller, and I'm 65 years old. For my entire life, I believed I had built a solid and loving family. That night, December 24th, as snow fell softly on the streets of Chicago, I was in my home celebrating Christmas with my son Alex, my daughter-in-law Brenda, and my dear 2-year-old granddaughter Chloe. The table was perfectly decorated with red and gold tablecloths, scented candles, and a dinner that had cost over $500. Brenda had insisted on cooking everything herself, which was unusual, considering she normally preferred us to hire caterers for important celebrations. "I want this Christmas to be special, Dad," she had told me with a smile that now, looking back, seems forced and sinister. Alex was particularly nervous that night. He had been acting strangely for weeks, avoiding deep conversations with me and giving evasive answers whenever I asked about his work at the family company we had built together over the past 15 years. Our textile import company had prospered considerably, generating annual profits exceeding $800,000. Chloe, my adored granddaughter, seemed to be the only one genuinely happy that night. She ran around the house in her new Christmas dress, excited about the presents under the tree. Her innocence was a dramatic contrast to the tension I was beginning to feel in the air, though at that moment I couldn't quite identify what was wrong. Brenda had prepared roasted lamb with spices, scalloped potatoes, roasted vegetables, and a chocolate cake that was my favorite. Everything smelled delicious, and I felt grateful to have a family that worked so hard to make me feel special. How naive I was to think that dedication came from love. When we sat down to dinner, I noticed Alex barely touched his food. Brenda constantly offered me more wine, more water, more of everything, insisting I try every dish she had prepared with so much care. Her eyes shone in a way I now recognize as pure anxiety. But at the time, I just thought it was culinary pride. "Dad, you have to try this special sauce I made for the lamb," Brenda said, insistently pushing a sauceboat toward me. "It's a secret recipe I learned from my grandmother. It has very special ingredients I've never used before." Just as I was about to pour that sauce onto my plate, my cell phone rang. It was 9:45 at night, an unusual time to get a call. The number showed up as unknown, and normally I wouldn't have answered, but something inside me pushed me to do it. "Hello?" I answered, stepping slightly away from the table. The voice I heard on the other end sent a chill down my spine. It was an elderly woman, speaking quietly but with desperate urgency. "Mr. Miller, you don't know me, but I live in the building across the street. Pretend you're sick and get out of that house immediately. They are going to poison you. I saw your daughter-in-law buying rat poison this afternoon at the pharmacy, and I overheard terrible conversations from my balcony." The line went dead. My heart started pounding so hard I thought everyone at the table could hear it. I looked at Alex, who was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. A mix of impatience and something I now recognize as guilt. Brenda was still smiling, but her hands were trembling slightly as she held the sauceboat. "Who was that, Dad?" Alex asked, his voice sounding a little too high-pitched. "No one important," I lied, trying to stay calm as my mind processed the unknown woman's words. In that moment, I faked a sudden stomach pain. "Oh, I don't feel well," I said, clutching my abdomen. "I think I need to use the restroom." I got up from the table and walked toward the bathroom, feeling everyone's eyes on my back. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply as I tried to process what I had just heard. Was it possible my own family wanted to harm me? Locked in the bathroom, my mind raced as I analyzed every detail from the past few weeks. Alex's strange behavior, Brenda's forced smiles, her unusual insistence on cooking Christmas dinner herself. It was all starting to fit together like pieces of a gruesome puzzle I had been completely ignoring. I then remembered a conversation I'd overheard 3 days earlier when I came home early from the office. Alex and Brenda were whispering in the kitchen, but they went silent the moment they heard my footsteps. At the time, I thought they were planning a Christmas surprise, but now those conspiratorial voices took on a completely different and terrifying meaning. The bathroom had a small window that opened to the backyard. I opened it carefully, thankful it was just wide enough for a person to fit through. At 65, I wasn't exactly agile, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins gave me a strength I hadn't felt in decades. Before I left, I heard worried voices on the other side of the door. "Dad, are you okay?" Alex shouted with an urgency that now seemed suspicious. "Robert, open up!" Please, Brenda pleaded, knocking softly on the wood. Only Chloe was silent, probably confused by the situation. I squeezed through the window with difficulty, landing in the small backyard where I used to grow tomatoes in the summer. The December cold hit me immediately, but fear was stronger than the freezing temperatures. I ran to the side door of the garage, grabbed the keys to my Mercedes, and drove out silently through the back exit of the property. As I drove through the deserted Chicago streets, my phone started ringing insistently. Alex was calling me over and over, followed by Brenda. I didn't answer a single call. I needed distance to think clearly about what was really happening in my home. I drove to the Grandview Hotel, a discreet place where I could think without interruptions. During the drive, I couldn't help but remember the last few months. Alex had shown signs of financial stress that I had attributed to normal business pressures. Brenda, for her part, had started making strange comments about inheritances and life insurance policies, questions I considered innocent curiosity at the time. Once I was settled in the hotel room, I decided to check my phone. I had 4 missed calls, 32 from Alex, 16 from Brenda, and 6 from unknown numbers, which were probably attempts to reach me from neighbors' or relatives' phones. The text messages were desperate. "Dad, we're so worried. Where are you?" Alex wrote. "The lamb is getting cold. Please come back," Brenda added in another message. "Chloe is crying because you disappeared," my son insisted in a later text. Each message only increased my suspicion that their concern wasn't genuine, but rather panic that their sinister plans had been ruined. I sat on the hotel bed and started recalling things I had overlooked. 2 months ago, Brenda had specifically asked about my blood pressure medication, claiming to be concerned about my health. Last week, Alex had insisted we update my will, arguing that changes in tax laws required immediate adjustments. I also remembered an unsettling conversation during our family lunch the previous Sunday. Brenda had casually mentioned a neighbor whose husband had died suddenly after dinner, commenting in far too much detail about how the initial symptoms had been mistaken for simple indigestion. The woman who had warned me on the phone mentioned she lived in the building across the street. From my hotel room window, I could see my house in the distance. The lights were still on, and I could imagine Alex and Brenda's desperation when they discovered my unexpected escape. My analytical mind, forged by decades of business experience, began to assess the situation strategically. If they had really planned to poison me, I needed concrete evidence before making any decisions. I couldn't just accuse my own family based solely on a call from a stranger, no matter how convincing she had sounded. I decided that the next day I would find that mysterious woman who had saved my life. I needed to know exactly what she had seen and heard. I would also have to discreetly investigate Alex's finances and Brenda's recent activities. If my suspicions were correct, there would be traces of their true intentions. The phone kept ringing throughout the night. Each call confirmed my growing conviction that something terribly sinister had been developing under my own roof, and that my last-minute escape had ruined a carefully crafted plan to eliminate me from their lives forever. I didn't sleep a minute that night, planning my next moves while I processed the painful reality that the 2 people I trusted most in the world apparently wanted me dead. At dawn on December 25th, I left the hotel with iron determination. I needed to find the woman who had saved my life, and I had a pretty good idea of where to look. The buildings across from my house were mainly residential, with balconies offering a direct view of my property. I walked along the opposite sidewalk, watching every window and balcony, looking for any sign of movement. It was early, but some people were already awake, preparing their Christmas breakfasts. On the 3rd floor of the nearest building, I noticed an elderly woman watering plants on her terrace, who immediately looked away when she saw me. I went up to her apartment and knocked gently on the door. A trembling voice asked who it was, before opening it with the security chain still on. "Ma'am, I'm Robert Miller. I believe you called me last night." The door opened completely, revealing a woman of about 72, with perfectly styled gray hair and lively eyes that showed intelligence. "Come in, quickly," she said, looking nervously down both ends of the hallway. "My name is Helen Peterson, and I'm afraid what I saw yesterday was very serious." Her apartment was decorated with classic furniture and family photos that showed decades of happy memories. She offered me coffee as she began to tell me what had prompted her emergency call. "Mr. Miller, I've lived here for 25 years, and from my balcony I've watched your family grow. I always thought it was beautiful to see how your son had settled down with that woman." Helen walked over to her balcony and pointed directly at my house. "Yesterday afternoon, around 5, I saw your daughter-in-law leave in a hurry. I watched her out of curiosity because she seemed very agitated. She went to the corner pharmacy, and when she came out, She was carrying a bag that she was trying to hide under her coat. The old woman showed me a small pair of binoculars she kept near the window. Forgive me if this seems nosy, but at my age, watching the neighborhood life has become my main entertainment. When your daughter-in-law returned, I saw her take a small bottle with a red label out of the bag, which I recognized immediately. It was industrial rat poison, the same kind my late husband used in his workshop. My stomach clenched as I heard this confirmation of my worst fears. Helen continued her story without pausing. After dinner, when it had gotten dark, I opened my window for some air and heard agitated voices coming from your kitchen. Your daughter-in-law was saying something about the correct dose and making sure the taste wasn't noticeable. Your son was nervously replying that it had to work tonight because there wouldn't be another chance like this. Mrs. Peterson went to a drawer and pulled out a notebook where she had meticulously written down everything she had observed. I wrote down every detail because I knew it was important. I also heard your daughter-in-law mention something about the lawyer's documents, and that after tonight everything would be easier. She showed me her notes, written in careful handwriting with precise dates. For the last 3 weeks, she had documented strange behaviors, unusual visits by Alex to bank offices, phone calls Brenda made in the yard to avoid being overheard, and late-night meetings with an older man carrying a briefcase, who Helen suspected might be a lawyer. The most alarming thing, Helen continued, was when I heard them discussing your heart medication. Your daughter-in-law was researching how certain poisons could mimic a natural heart attack, especially in people your age with a medical history. This revelation hit me hard. I had indeed suffered a minor heart attack 3 years ago, and had been on preventive medication ever since. Any medical examiner would attribute an episode to natural causes, especially during a stressful celebration like Christmas. Helen poured me more coffee as she continued to share crucial information. Yesterday morning, I saw your son burning papers in the backyard. I couldn't see what the documents were, but the furtive way he did it seemed suspicious. I also noticed that for the past few days, your daughter-in-law had been obsessively cleaning the kitchen, as if she were eliminating evidence. The old woman went to the balcony again and pointed at my house. When I decided to call you last night, it was because I saw how your daughter-in-law was preparing that special sauce. The way she handled the ingredients, adding something from a small bottle while constantly glancing at the door, convinced me that I was witnessing an attempted murder. She explained that she had gotten my phone number by discreetly asking other neighbors who knew about my business. I couldn't stay silent knowing what was happening. I've lived long enough to recognize the signs of danger, and what I saw yesterday was beyond any reasonable doubt. Before I left, Helen gave me all her notes and assured me she would be available as a witness if I needed her official statement. Your family looked picture-perfect from the outside, but appearances can be terribly deceiving. What they were planning to do was monstrous. I left her apartment with the absolute certainty that my nighttime escape had prevented my murder. Now, I had enough information to start a deeper investigation into Alex and Brenda's true intentions, and the motives that had led them to plan something so heinous against the person who had loved and supported them the most for so many years. After my revealing conversation with Helen, I decided I needed professional help to thoroughly investigate the situation. Through business contacts, I knew a private investigator named Michael Evans, who had previously worked on corporate fraud cases for several of my colleagues in the textile industry. I contacted him immediately from my hotel room. Michael agreed to meet me that same afternoon at his office, located in Chicago's financial district. He was a discreet and experienced man in his 50s, with over 2 decades of investigating complex cases involving family and money. "Mr. Miller," he said as he reviewed Helen's notes, "what you're describing sounds like a classic case of family conspiracy motivated by inheritance. We need to examine your son's finances and the recent activities of both of them. If they plan this carefully, there will be digital and documentary trails." Michael immediately began his investigation, accessing financial databases and public records. In less than 4 hours, he had compiled information that left me completely devastated. Alex had accumulated debts totaling $370,000 over the last 8 months. The records showed personal loans from multiple banks, all requested without my knowledge, even though I was the majority partner in our family business. Alex had used his stake in the company as collateral, compromising assets that technically belonged to me as well. "Here's the most troubling part," Michael explained, pointing to documents on his screen. "Your son tried to get an additional loan of $200,000 3 weeks ago, but was rejected because the banks considered him over-leveraged. That rejection likely accelerated their desperate plans. The investigation also revealed that Brenda had been consulting multiple websites about inheritances, life insurance, and legal procedures for claiming assets in cases of sudden death. Her browser history included specific searches on heart attack symptoms and substances undetectable in autopsies. Michael had gained access to their phone records, discovering frequent calls to a lawyer specializing in estates named Edward Vance. This lawyer has a questionable reputation, Michael informed me. He's been involved in several cases where relatives have tried to speed up inheritance processes through unethical means. Bank documents showed that Alex had tried to access my personal accounts on 3 occasions in the last month, using information he could only have gotten by going through my private papers at home. All attempts were blocked by the bank's security measures, but they confirmed his intention to seize my financial resources. Mr. Miller, there's more, Michael continued with a grave expression. Your daughter-in-law significantly increased her searches for homemade poisons after the first week of December. She also visited 3 different pharmacies, buying small amounts of chemical products that, when combined, could create a lethal substance. The investigation revealed suspicious financial movements in the joint account Alex shared with Brenda. They had withdrawn large sums of cash, apparently to pay for private consultations and acquire materials they didn't want registered on credit card transactions. Michael showed me photos he had obtained from security cameras at various stores. Brenda appeared buying latex gloves, industrial bleach, and other cleaning products in unusual quantities. This suggests they were planning to meticulously clean up any evidence after executing their plan, the detective explained. The phone records also revealed late-night conversations between Alex and the lawyer, Vance, over the past 4 weeks. The frequency and intensity of these calls had increased considerably in the days leading up to Christmas. Your son had also started the preliminary process to change beneficiaries on some company insurance policies, Michael informed me. Although he didn't complete the process, his intentions were clear. He was trying to maximize the financial benefits of your death. The most disturbing information was the discovery that Brenda had been researching my daily routines, taking notes on my medication schedules, eating habits, and weekly activities. This systematic surveillance suggested meticulous planning that had been going on for months. Michael concluded his presentation with a blunt professional assessment. Mr. Miller, there is no doubt that your family planned your murder with premeditation. The combination of financial desperation, opportunity, and access to you created the perfect conditions for them to consider homicide as their only way out. I left the detective's office with a complete file of evidence confirming my worst fears. My son, who had been my pride and trusted partner, along with his wife, had conspired to kill me and inherit my estate. The betrayal was absolute and devastating. That night, in the solitude of my hotel room, I cried for the first time in decades, not just for the danger I had faced, but for the irreparable loss of the family I thought I knew and loved. The next day, I decided to conduct my own supplementary investigation, visiting my home when I knew it would be empty. Michael had provided me with discreet recording equipment to document any physical evidence I might find. I knew Alex would be at the office, and Brenda took Chloe to school every morning between 8 and 9. I arrived at my own house feeling like an intruder. The keys trembled in my hands as I opened the front door, aware that just 36 hours earlier, this very place had been the scene of an attempted murder against me. The first thing I noticed was the immaculate state of the kitchen. Every surface gleamed as if it had undergone a thorough professional cleaning. The Christmas dinner dishes had completely disappeared, including the infamous sauce boat that Brenda had been so insistent I try. The smell of industrial cleaning chemicals filled the air. Going to the study where I kept my personal documents, I discovered that someone had been meticulously going through my files. Although they had tried to reorganize everything to hide their search, my detailed memory immediately noticed that entire folders had been moved from their original locations. My personal safe, hidden behind a painting on the wall, showed clear signs of tampering. Tool marks around the lock indicated attempts to force it open. Fortunately, it had resisted their efforts, but the attempt confirmed they had been trying to access my most important documents: wills, insurance policies, and property deeds. In the bedroom Alex and Brenda shared, I found even more disturbing evidence. Under the mattress, hidden in a sealed plastic bag, was the bottle of rat poison that Helen had seen Brenda buy. The label showed clear warnings about its lethal toxicity in humans. Next to the poison, I found several documents printed from the internet about poisoning methods, symptoms of intoxication, and post-mortem forensic procedures. The texts were underlined with Brenda's handwritten notes, including dose calculations based on my body weight and physical condition. In the drawer of Alex's nightstand, I discovered something that completely broke my heart. A letter addressed to Chloe, explaining that her grandfather had passed away peacefully during Christmas dinner due to heart problems. The letter was dated before December 24th, confirming that they had planned my death weeks in advance. The most revealing document I found was on the bedroom desk. A draft of a forged will that named me as the grantor but had been written entirely by Alex. In this fraudulent document, he appeared as the sole universal heir to all my assets, including the family business, real estate properties, and bank accounts. The forgery was sophisticated, using official notary paper they had obtained through the lawyer, Vance. They had even practiced imitating my signature, as evidenced by multiple sheets with attempts to reproduce my personal autograph. Some attempts were dated as far back as early November. In Brenda's closet, I found clothes stained with chemical residues that she had tried to wash repeatedly without complete success. A white blouse still had traces of substances that matched the industrial cleaning products they had used to eliminate evidence of their poison preparation. Looking through bills and receipts saved in various drawers, I documented systematic purchases of items needed to carry out and conceal their crime. Disposable gloves, face masks, specialized cleaning products, and tools they had used to try to open my safe. In the garage, I found the charred remains of documents that Alex had burned, just as Helen had observed from her balcony. Although they were partially destroyed, I managed to recover fragments that showed financial calculations related to the total value of my estate and liquidity projections after my death. The most chilling discovery was a detailed timeline they had prepared for the hours following my supposed death. It included contacts to be made, authorities to be notified, and a specific sequence of actions to maximize the credibility of a natural death from cardiac causes. They had also prepared speeches of grief and funeral tributes they planned to deliver during my burial. Reading those false words of love and respect, written by the same people who had planned my murder, provoked a mixture of anger and sadness I had never experienced before. Before leaving the house, I discreetly installed additional security cameras in strategic locations, following Michael's recommendations. I needed to document any subsequent behavior that could serve as additional evidence of their guilt. I left my home with the absolute certainty that I had gathered irrefutable proof of the homicidal conspiracy. Every object, every document, every chemical trace confirmed that my own family had meticulously planned my physical elimination to benefit financially from my death. That afternoon, as I organized all the evidence in my hotel room, I understood that my next step would be to confront Alex directly, but this time armed with full knowledge of his criminal intentions and prepared to document his reaction to the exposure of his failed plan. After 3 days of collecting evidence, I decided it was time to confront Alex directly. Michael had provided me with a nearly invisible audio recording device that could capture any admission of guilt. My strategy was to feign total ignorance of their true intentions while guiding him toward incriminating confessions. I sent him a text message from a temporary number, saying I was fine but needed to talk to him urgently about important family matters. I suggested we meet at our favorite restaurant, Gibson's, where we had celebrated so many business successes over the years. Alex arrived 15 minutes late, visibly nervous, and with deep dark circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. His hug was tense, forced, and he avoided direct eye contact with me for the first few minutes of our meeting. "Dad, we were frantic," he began immediately, without even waiting for us to sit down. "You disappeared without explanation in the middle of dinner. Brenda cried all night, thinking something terrible had happened to you." His performance was convincing, but I knew the truth behind those tears. I decided to play my role as a worried but confused father. "Son, I had a sudden spell of indigestion and didn't want to ruin Chloe's Christmas celebration. I needed some fresh air and time to recover." Alex visibly relaxed upon hearing my seemingly innocent explanation. "Of course, Dad, we completely understand. Your health is the most important thing to us. In fact, Brenda has been researching special diets that could benefit your heart condition. That mention of my medical condition was no accident." The recorder captured every word as I feigned gratitude for his supposed concern. "It's comforting to know you're so interested in my well-being," I replied, watching him relax progressively. During the meal, I steered the conversation toward financial topics, feigning ignorance of his desperate economic situation. "Alex, I've been thinking about expanding our textile business. Maybe we should consider additional investments in the next quarter." His face immediately paled. "Dad, maybe this isn't the best time for new investments. The market is complicated lately. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to find plausible excuses to avoid detailed financial discussions. Complicated? Our balance sheets show consistent profits, I insisted, pressing him subtly. Unless there's something I'm not seeing in our accounting records. The tension in his expression intensified noticeably. Well, Dad, there are some temporary adjustments I've had to make to optimize our operations. Nothing to worry about, just strategic reorganizations. I decided to increase the psychological pressure. Alex, I trust your management completely, but at my age, I prefer to stay informed about every aspect of our finances. Could you provide me with a detailed summary of those reorganizations? His breathing quickened visibly. Of course, Dad, I'll prepare a full report for you next week. Right now, I'm compiling data from multiple sources to ensure absolute accuracy. The conversation continued for 2 hours, during which Alex inadvertently confirmed several aspects of his conspiracy. He mentioned external pressures he was facing, veiled references to definitive solutions for family problems, and comments on the importance of acting quickly before opportunities disappear. When I broached the subject of my will, his reaction was particularly revealing. Dad, lately I've been thinking about the importance of having updated legal documents. We never know when they might be needed. Interesting you should mention that, I replied carefully. A few weeks ago, my lawyer suggested I review some clauses. Have you also consulted legal specialists recently? Alex nearly choked on his drink. Yes. Brenda and I have been looking into estate procedures. Just as a precaution, you understand. We want to be prepared for any eventuality. That partial admission was perfectly recorded on my device. I continued to explore his psychological motivations, feigning paternal vulnerability. Son, sometimes I worry that when I'm gone, you'll face financial difficulties. Is there anything I should know about your current situation? His face showed an evident internal struggle between guilt and desperation. Dad, we all have occasional challenges. The important thing is that you know how much we love you and value everything you've built for our family. Toward the end of our meeting, I managed to get him to indirectly admit his knowledge of toxic substances. When I casually mentioned a newspaper article about accidental poisonings, he responded with specific details about symptoms and forensic detection that only someone who had done prior research could know. It's terrifying to think how common household substances can be so dangerous, I commented deliberately. Absolutely, he replied with growing nervousness. Brenda has been very careful lately with cleaning products and other household chemicals. You can never be too cautious. That specific reference to other chemicals provided additional evidence of his knowledge of the poisons they had acquired. When we said goodbye, his hug was even more tense than at the beginning, and I noticed his hands were sweating profusely. I returned to the hotel with incriminating recordings that perfectly complemented the physical evidence I had collected. Alex had indirectly confirmed multiple aspects of his homicidal conspiracy, giving me enough material for the next phase of my plan, the final confrontation that would fully expose his betrayal before the entire family. After getting the incriminating recordings of Alex, I decided the time had come for the final confrontation. I organized a family meeting at my home, summoning everyone under the pretext of clarifying my Christmas disappearance and discussing future plans for our family business. I arrived home an hour before them to carefully set the stage. I installed additional cameras in the main living room and placed backup recorders in strategic locations. Michael was waiting in his vehicle 2 blocks away, ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. Alex and Brenda arrived on time, accompanied by Chloe, who immediately ran to hug me with the genuine joy of a little girl who had missed her grandfather. That display of pure love was a painful contrast to her parents' sinister intentions. Dad, thanks for calling us together, Alex said, trying to maintain a calm composure. We hope you're feeling better after your episode on Christmas Day. Brenda nodded silently, but her eyes avoided meeting mine. It's precisely that episode I want to talk about, I began, watching as tension gradually took over their faces. I've done a lot of thinking these past few days, and I believe there are important things we need to clear up as a family. Chloe sat on the main sofa, completely oblivious to the gravity of what was about to unfold. Alex and Brenda took opposite seats, maintaining a physical distance from me and from each other, as if instinctively sensing the approaching danger. During my absence, I've had time to think about our family relationships, our financial future, and certain behaviors I had been overlooking. I continued, letting the ambiguity of my words increase their anxiety. Brenda was the first to show obvious signs of nervousness. Robert, if there's something that has bothered or worried you, we can talk about it openly. We're family, and communication is essential. You're right, Brenda. Communication is essential. That's why I've decided to share some very interesting conversations I've had recently. I took out my phone and placed the first audio file on the living room table. This recording is from my meeting with Alex 2 days ago at Gibson's. I pressed the play button, and my son's voice echoed clearly in the room, indirectly admitting knowledge of toxic substances and suspicious legal procedures. The color drained from Alex's face. "Dad, you recorded me without my consent? How could you do something like that?" His outrage was a desperate defensive tactic to divert attention from his own incriminating admissions. "The question isn't how I could record my own son," I replied with calculated calm, "but why my son has such specific knowledge about poisons and forensic procedures." The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe began to sense the growing tension. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? Why do Mom and Dad look scared?" Her innocence broke my heart, knowing I was about to destroy her perception of her parents forever. I continued playing selected clips from the recording, where Alex made veiled references to external pressures, definitive solutions, and his knowledge of household chemicals. Each revelation visibly increased their desperation. "This doesn't prove anything," Brenda tried to defend, but her voice trembled uncontrollably. "Conversations can easily be misinterpreted out of context." "You're right, Brenda. Conversations can be misinterpreted, but physical objects are much harder to explain." I walked over to a bag I had prepared earlier and pulled out the bottle of rat poison I had found in their bedroom. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Brenda turned so pale she looked ill, while Alex tried to stammer out incoherent explanations. "Dad, there was a rodent problem in the basement." "Rodents in the basement?" I repeated with controlled irony. "And for that, you needed to research lethal doses based on the body weight of a person my age and physical build?" I pulled out the printed pages with Brenda's calculations, each with specific handwritten notes. Chloe began to cry silently, sensing that something terrible was being revealed about her parents. She moved closer to me, seeking protection, instinctively moving away from Alex and Brenda. "I also found this draft of a forged will," I continued, showing the fraudulent document they had prepared, with my signature practiced repeatedly until they achieved a convincing imitation. The evidence was irrefutable and undeniable. Alex finally broke down emotionally. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We were desperate. The debts. We didn't know what to do." "So you decided to kill me?" I asked directly, needing a full confession in front of my granddaughter, who deserved to know the truth about her parents. Brenda tried one last defensive maneuver. "We never would have gone through with it. We were just exploring extreme options. We never would have actually hurt you." "Exploring extreme options?" I repeated in disbelief. "You bought poison, calculated lethal doses, forged documents, and prepared my murder during Christmas dinner. At what point exactly were you planning to stop?" The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe was now crying openly, finally understanding that her parents had planned to kill her grandfather. That childlike comprehension of the deepest possible betrayal shattered the last remnants of composure I had left. In that moment, I made the decision that would change our lives forever. I called Michael and told him to contact the authorities immediately, because this confrontation had provided the confessions needed to proceed legally against my own loved ones. After the devastating confessions from Alex and Brenda, I reached for the phone to contact Michael, but before I did, I decided it was time to make a decision that reflected both justice and paternal wisdom. Chloe was still sobbing in my arms, and her innocent pain made me reflect on the true purpose of this confrontation. "Alex, Brenda," I began, my voice firm but controlled. "The evidence I've gathered is enough to send you to prison for years for conspiracy to commit murder. However, before I contact the authorities, I want you to understand the real consequences of your actions." I walked to the window from where I could see Helen's building, remembering how a stranger had shown more concern for my well-being than my own family. A neighbor I didn't even know risked her peace of mind to save my life, while you, who have received my unconditional love and support for decades, were planning my murder. Alex tried to approach me, but I raised my hand to stop him. "I don't want to hear any more excuses or justifications. What I need is for you to understand that from this moment on, everything between us will change irreversibly." I pulled out documents I had prepared during my days at the hotel, including bank transfers and asset modifications I had executed with the help of my personal lawyer. During these past few days, I have made definitive financial decisions that will permanently affect our family relationships. Brenda sat up abruptly upon hearing about asset changes. What do you mean, definitive financial decisions? Her concern was no longer focused on my well-being, but on the economic implications of their failed actions. I have paid all of your debts, Alex. $370,000 was transferred this morning to settle every loan, every financial obligation you took on without my knowledge. The surprise on his face was evident, but I continued without pause. However, that will be the last financial help you ever receive from me for the rest of your life. I have completely changed my will, removing your name as a beneficiary of any future inheritance. The words echoed in the living room like final sentences. Chloe lifted her tear-stained face. Grandpa, does that mean Mom and Dad won't have any more money? Her innocent question perfectly encapsulated the practical consequences of the decisions I was making. It means, dear Chloe, that your parents will have to learn to live based on their own work and effort, not on expectations of receiving money they haven't honestly earned. I stroked her hair as I explained complex concepts in terms she could understand. Alex slumped in his chair, finally grasping the full ramifications of his actions. Dad, without the family business, without access to the resources we've managed together, I won't know how to support my family. You should have considered those consequences before you planned my murder, I replied without compassion. Millions of people support their families with honest jobs and personal effort. Now you will have that opportunity to show your true character. Brenda tried a desperate plea. Robert, think about Chloe. She's innocent in all of this. Don't let our mistakes affect her future and her stability. It is precisely because I am thinking of Chloe that I have made these decisions, I retorted firmly. I have established a trust fund that will guarantee her college education and basic needs until she is 25. But that money will be managed by a bank, not by you. The revelation about the trust fund brought visible relief to Chloe, but increased her parents' desperation as they realized they had completely lost control over the family's resources. I continued explaining the asset changes I had implemented. The family business will be sold to our main competitors. The resulting money will be donated entirely to charitable organizations that support victims of domestic violence and family betrayal. You're going to destroy everything we built together? Alex asked, his voice breaking. You destroyed everything we built together when you decided my death was preferable to honestly facing your financial problems, I responded with deep sadness but unshakable determination. I turned to Chloe and took her small hands in mine. My dear granddaughter, I want you to understand that these decisions are not based on revenge, but on the need to teach important lessons about consequences and personal responsibility. Your parents will have to start a new life, learning to value honest work and authentic relationships. I hope that one day they understand that true love cannot be bought with money or maintained through deceit. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number. You can proceed with contacting the authorities. We have recorded confessions and enough physical evidence to press formal charges. While we waited for the police to arrive, I hugged Chloe one last time before her world changed forever. Always remember, little one, that actions have consequences, and that honesty and hard work are the only solid foundations for building a worthy life. That afternoon, when the authorities arrived, Alex and Brenda were arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, while Chloe was temporarily taken to my brother's house until the legal proceedings were resolved. The months following the arrest were a period of profound transformation in my life. After selling the family home where so many beautiful memories had turned into nightmares, I decided to move into a modest apartment in a new neighborhood, physically distancing myself from the scenes that constantly reminded me of the betrayal. The legal process moved slowly but decisively. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Miss Linda Carter, had assured me that the evidence collected was exceptional, and that she had rarely seen a family conspiracy case so meticulously documented. During the preliminary hearings, I had to testify in detail about the events of Christmas night and my subsequent discoveries. Seeing Alex and Brenda in the defendant's dock brought a complex mix of paternal pain and satisfaction for having prevented my own murder. Chloe was now living with my sister Sarah and her husband in Austin. The girl had required intensive psychological support to process the trauma of discovering her parents' homicidal intentions. Her child therapists reported slow but steady progress in her emotional recovery. I established a completely new routine for my daily life. Every morning, I visited the local senior center, where I had started offering business management classes for retired entrepreneurs. This activity gave me purpose and social connection without the complications of toxic family relationships. On weekends, I would travel to Austin to visit Chloe. Those meetings were bittersweet, She showed genuine affection for me, but occasionally asked when she could see her parents again. Explaining the reality of her situation without further traumatizing her required extreme delicacy. "Grandpa, did Mom and Dad do something very bad?" she asked me during one of our walks in the park. Her innocence was a painful contrast to the gravity of the actions that had shattered our family. "Yes, sweetie, they made some very wrong decisions that hurt a lot of people, especially you and me," I explained with honesty appropriate for her age. "But that doesn't mean you don't love them. It just means that sometimes people make mistakes so big that they have very serious consequences." My new life also included an unexpected friendship with Helen Peterson, the neighbor who had saved my life. I visited her apartment weekly for tea and to chat about her neighborhood observations. She had become a valuable confidant and living proof of the value of maintaining authentic community ties. "Mr. Miller," Helen would say during one of our conversations, "you did the right thing by exposing the truth, even though it was painful. Justice sometimes requires tremendous personal sacrifices." The main trial was scheduled for April of the following year. Alex and Brenda's defense attorneys tried to negotiate reduced plea bargains, but I had insisted that they face the full consequences of their actions. I wasn't seeking revenge, but for a clear precedent to be set about the repercussions of betraying the most fundamental family trust. During this period, I began writing my memoirs, documenting not only the recent events but my entire journey as an entrepreneur and a father. The writing process helped me process decades of memories and understand how I had come to raise a son capable of planning my murder. Reflecting on the upbringing I had provided Alex, I recognized significant mistakes in my paternal approach. Perhaps I had been too permissive financially, shielding him from the natural consequences of his irresponsible decisions and creating an economic dependency that had eventually turned into homicidal resentment. My physical health had paradoxically strengthened during these months of stress. The constant activity, improved diet, and renewed purpose had beneficial effects that surprised even my cardiologist, Dr. James Chen. "Mr. Miller, your cardiovascular indicators have improved considerably," he informed me during my regular checkups. "Ironically, surviving an assassination attempt seems to have revitalized your body." The nights were the hardest moments. In the solitude of my apartment, I faced the deep pain of having lost not only my son, but also the illusion that I had built a loving, united family. The memories of Alex as a child, of his early business successes, of happy moments that now seemed completely false, haunted me regularly. However, I also experienced a growing sense of personal liberation. For the first time in decades, my financial and personal decisions were not influenced by complex family considerations. This newfound autonomy allowed me to explore interests and relationships I had neglected during years of dedication to business and fatherhood. By the end of the year, I had established a new personal identity completely independent of my role as a betrayed father. I was simply Robert, a man who had survived the ultimate betrayal and had chosen to rebuild his life based on principles of honesty, dignified work, and authentic relationships, values I hoped to pass on to Chloe as she grew up in a healthier family environment. 6 months after the trial, which had ended with sentences of 5 years in prison for Alex and 4 years for Brenda for conspiracy to commit murder, I received an unexpected letter that would once again change the course of my family's story. The letter came from the correctional facility where my son was serving his sentence. The handwriting was unmistakably his, but the tone was completely different from any previous communication. There were no desperate pleas or attempts at emotional manipulation. Instead, I found words of deep reflection and personal responsibility that I had never heard from Alex. "Dad," the letter began, "during these months in prison, I've had time to truly face what we did, not just the legal consequences, but the moral horror of having planned your death. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness because I understand that some actions are beyond any possibility of absolution." I continued reading with growing surprise. Alex described his participation in psychological rehabilitation programs within the prison, sessions where he had analyzed the thought patterns that had led him to consider murder as a solution to financial problems. "I've started working in the prison's woodshop," he wrote. "For the first time in my adult life, my income comes exclusively from my own physical effort, not from our family business or your financial support. Every dollar I earn has real value because it represents honest work." The transformation described in his words seemed authentic, but my recent experience with his capacity for deceit kept me cautious. However, something in the direct simplicity of his expression suggested a genuine change in his life perspective. Over the following weeks, the letters continued to arrive regularly. Alex didn't ask for visits or financial help for the commissary. He simply shared reflections on books he was reading, manual skills he was developing, and conversations with other inmates that had given him new perspectives on personal responsibility. A cellmate asked me what kind of person I was before I came here, he related in a later letter. When I told him my story, he said something that hit me hard. You had everything most people only dream of, and yet you chose violence. That says more about your character than about your financial situation. Chloe, now fully adapted to her new life in Austin, occasionally brought up questions about her parents during our meetings. My sister Sarah had handled the situation with exemplary sensitivity, explaining that her parents were learning important lessons without unnecessarily traumatizing the child. "Grandpa, do you think Dad is really changing?" she asked me during one of our Sunday walks. Her emotional maturity had advanced considerably during these months of family stability. "It's possible, Chloe. Sometimes people need very serious consequences to understand the value of relationships and the importance of honest work," I answered carefully. "But real changes are shown through consistent actions over a long time, not just with pretty words." Meanwhile, I had established a satisfying routine in my new life. My classes at the Senior Center had expanded to include workshops on business ethics and preventing family fraud. Sharing my experience was helping other older entrepreneurs identify warning signs in their own families. Brenda, on the other hand, had not communicated with me at all since the trial. According to reports I received indirectly, she had maintained a defensive and resentful attitude during her incarceration, blaming external circumstances for her criminal decisions. The difference between Alex's and Brenda's reactions to the consequences of their actions gave me interesting insights into their fundamental characters. Perhaps my son still had a capacity for moral growth that his wife did not possess. One day, in September, I received a particularly moving letter where Alex described a project he had started inside the prison, teaching basic literacy to inmates who couldn't read or write. "Helping others has taught me the real value of contributing positively to people's lives," he explained. "For the first time, I understand that true satisfaction comes from giving, not from taking. For years, I took your support, your money, your trust, without offering anything equivalent in return. Now I understand that dynamic was unsustainable and destructive." These reflections led me to consider the possibility that Alex was experiencing an authentic transformation. It didn't mean immediate forgiveness or the restoration of our former relationship, but it suggested that perhaps one day we could rebuild some kind of bond based on mutual respect and absolute honesty. At the end of that month, I made a significant decision. I wrote my first reply to his letters. It was not a reconciliation, but an acknowledgement of his apparent personal growth and a cautious expression of hope for his post-prison future. "Alex," I wrote, "your words suggest profound changes in your understanding of responsibility and honest work. When you complete your sentence, you will have the opportunity to demonstrate if those changes are permanent. Chloe and I will be watching, hoping you prove that you can be the man and father you always had the potential to be." 2 years after my first reply to Alex's letters, the time came for his parole hearing. During this period, our correspondence had evolved into deep conversations about fatherhood, responsibility, and the true meaning of dignified work. His reflections had shown consistency and genuine growth that allowed me to maintain a cautious hope for his transformation. Chloe, now 14, had expressed a desire to know about her father's progress before his release. My sister Sarah had admirably managed my granddaughter's upbringing, providing her with emotional stability and a solid education that allowed her to gradually process the complexity of our family situation. "Grandpa, do you think Dad has really learned the lessons he needed to learn?" she asked me during one of our weekly phone calls. Her maturity had advanced considerably, but she retained the natural hope of a daughter who loved her father despite knowing his mistakes. On the day of Alex's release, I decided to be there outside the correctional facility, not as a gesture of automatic reconciliation, but as a demonstration that I was willing to objectively evaluate his transformation. I brought Chloe with me, who had insisted on coming after long conversations about realistic expectations. When Alex emerged from the prison building, his physical appearance reflected the internal changes he had described in his letters. He had lost a considerable amount of weight, his posture was more upright, and his eyes showed a serenity I had never observed during his years as a young, irresponsible adult. His first gesture was not to walk directly toward us, but to stand still for several minutes, breathing deeply in the open air. seemingly absorbing the reality of his recovered freedom. When he finally saw us, his approach was hesitant and respectful, without any assumptions about the kind of reception he deserved. "Dad, Chloe," he greeted us with a controlled voice. "Thank you for coming. I didn't expect you to be here, but I deeply appreciate the chance to see you." His humility was a dramatic contrast to the arrogance that had characterized his behavior before the arrest. Chloe ran to him with tears in her eyes, and the hug they shared was genuinely emotional. Alex cried silently as he held his daughter, who had grown so much during his absence. "You've grown so much, little one. I am so deeply sorry I missed these years because of such terrible decisions." In the following months, Alex consistently demonstrated the changes he had promised in his letters. He found a job at a local carpentry shop, living in a modest apartment that he paid for entirely with his own income. He did not ask for financial help or try to regain access to the family resources he had lost. His visits with Chloe were gradual and initially supervised, but his paternal behavior had matured remarkably. He was no longer the permissive father who compensated for his emotional absence with expensive gifts, but someone who invested genuine time in getting to know his daughter's interests and concerns. "Dad taught me how to make a small table for my room," Chloe told me after one of her visits. "He says that working with his hands has taught him about patience and precision, things he never valued when he had easy money." During a family dinner I organized 6 months after his release, Alex asked to speak with me privately. "Dad, I want you to know that I will never expect you to restore my access to family resources. I've learned that financial independence is essential for maintaining healthy relationships and self-respect." His words reflected a deep understanding of the destructive dynamics that had characterized our previous relationship. "Working for every dollar I earn has taught me its real value. Now I understand why my careless attitude toward money bothered you for so many years." Brenda, who had also been released on parole, had not tried to contact us. According to reports I received indirectly, she had left Chicago immediately after her release, apparently with no interest in rebuilding a relationship with Chloe or acknowledging responsibility for her past actions. "Do you miss Mom?" I carefully asked Chloe during one of our walks. "Sometimes I miss the mom I thought she was," she replied with surprising wisdom for her age. "But now I understand that version of her probably never really existed. I'd rather have a real father who is learning to be a better person." By the end of that year, Alex had established a completely independent and responsible life. His family visits were regular but not dependent, and his relationship with me had evolved into one of mutual respect, based on absolute honesty about our past mistakes. "Dad," he told me during our last conversation of the year, "I know I can never fully repair the damage I caused, but I want you to know that every day I work to be worthy of the forgiveness you have gradually given me." "Alex," I replied, "forgiveness isn't given just once. It's built daily through consistent actions. Your transformation has been the most valuable gift you could have offered me after the deepest betrayal I could ever imagine." Reflecting on our entire story, I understand that the phone call I received that Christmas night not only saved my physical life but started a process of family destruction and reconstruction that allowed us to discover more authentic versions of ourselves. Chloe grew up surrounded by honesty, Alex learned the value of dignified work, and I discovered that true paternal love sometimes requires severe consequences to teach fundamental lessons about character and responsibility. If you enjoyed this story, support us with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your opinions in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box that appears on the left. Thank you for joining us.